Welcome to the New York Business Leaders Podcast, presented by the Coyle Group. We interview the most interesting and influential business leaders in New York and hear their stories of success, challenges, and lessons learned while building their businesses and personal brands. New episodes drop weekly, so please be sure to subscribe to get updates in your favorite stream. Without further delay, here's your host of the New York Business Leaders Podcast, Gordon Coyle.
In today's podcast, I speak with my friend Steve Feldman, an attorney and partner at Murphy & McGonigle, a mid-sized firm located in New York City with offices in Washington, D.C., San Francisco, Chicago, and Richmond, Virginia. Steve's area of expertise is white-collar criminal defense, internal investigations, securities, enforcement matters, and complex civil and criminal disputes. A former federal prosecutor with the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York, Steve is the attorney you call when the SEC, FBI, Department of Justice, or other regulatory or enforcement agency is knocking on your door. We focus our conversation today on crypto and blockchain regulations currently in the works at the SEC and what clients in the crypto space should be looking for and preparing for. We also talk about the firm's mobile phone app, M&M Defend, which is available both in the Apple and Google Play stores to download. M&M Defend is a unique resource tool anyone can use if they are approached by a regulatory or enforcement agency and don't quite know what to do. It also includes a hotline access to attorneys in the firm to respond quickly if you find yourself in that position. An interesting conversation about a world many of us know little about, and Steve gives some clarity and guidance around crypto, blockchain, virtual currencies, and NFTs. I think you're going to enjoy this. Lastly, if you have an interesting story that you would like to tell on this podcast, please reach out to me. My email will be in the show notes. Let's connect and chat about getting you on the show. Now, without further ado, on to the show. Steve Feldman, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Gordon.
It's good to have you here. Why don't you take a minute and introduce yourself?
Thank you. So I am a white-collar criminal defense and investigations attorney at Murphy & McGonigle, a law firm with offices in Virginia, D.C., New York, Chicago, and San Francisco. I'm in the New York office. I previously spent 6.5 years as a federal prosecutor, a big chunk of that in the securities unit. I did that at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Manhattan. And with that background as a securities and commodities fraud prosecutor, I now focus my work really on the financial services and banking industry, representing individuals in securities cases, things like insider trading or broker bribery, cases in front of the Securities and Exchange Commission, enforcement matters, cases by FINRA, the Financial Regulatory Authority, if they're coming out and enforcing matters, and other all sorts of white-collar world cases. So it could be everything from business frauds to bribing politicians to hacking into your former employer's email system. Any and all those things qualify as white-collar, and I represent people in federal court generally fighting those kind of cases.
Great. So today we're going to talk about a narrow slice of what you're doing and how it kind of impacts my world and probably a lot of the listeners' worlds out there. And it has to do with cryptocurrencies and the Department of Justice's new initiative on regulating crypto. Can you kind of give us a broad overview of what we're seeing here, why it's taking place, and why it's taken so long to get to this point?
Well, we're seeing across the Biden administration in any number of different organizations, a more concentrated push at cryptocurrencies. So we're seeing the SEC speaking very strongly about cryptocurrencies from its new chairman, Gary Gensler. We're seeing the Department of Justice form this new national cryptocurrency enforcement team, a very high-ranking group within the department that's supposed to focus on cryptocurrencies. We're seeing organizations like FinCEN, which is the organization responsible in the Department of Treasury for collecting suspicious activity reports and currency transaction reports. They're now upping the notice to to covered financial institutions that they need to be on the lookout for the use of cryptocurrency and ransomware and things like that. So we're seeing a push across the government in many different forms to start targeting cryptocurrency. And I think that that's a reaction to the continued success and growth of cryptocurrency and blockchain technology more generally. Now along with the DeFi, the distributed finance. So we're seeing that as these things continue to grow and become more important to our society, the government is playing catch up and realizing that it wants to regulate and be involved with these things.
Mm-hmm. In preparation of our conversation, I kind of thought to myself, I was looking at different things online, and I was thinking to myself, this is a form of currency, a form of transaction. So many things in our lives are regulated and have been for hundreds of years. Why do you think the federal government didn't look at crypto at not its inception, but once it started to be used in commercial trade, why didn't it start to look at the regulatory aspects of it back then?
Well, I mean, it's a new area, and it's hard for the government to speak with one voice when there's not unity about what that voice should be. So certainly, we rely on the White House and the administration to speak with a voice, and if that voice is a complete free market voice, laissez-faire, we're going to let the industry do whatever they want. That's in fact a decision. And so perhaps that was the decision of the last administration to not be involved. And but you know, they certainly were studying issues, and there were reports and following what was going on with some issues, such as the use of cryptocurrency to support ransomware or terrorism financing or breaking sanctions. But now we have a different administration, and so it speaks with a different voice. And perhaps as we see more going on with the use of cryptocurrency, perhaps there's more of a consensus. And so the regulators and the administration are willing to speak up and take points of view, as is Congress.
Yeah, it's a good point of view. I guess it's, we always think about these things from a perspective that government should always kind of do the right thing about taking care of business. But you bring up that maybe the prior administration was like making the conscious decision to not do anything. So,
right, I mean, that's a way of doing business, certainly. You're right. I mean, look, there's plenty of things we trade that the government doesn't get involved in, and because we don't think it's that important. People might trade Pokemon cards or something, right? We're not worried about the government regulating Pokemon cards because we're not worried it's going to become a side, a side market that with lots of people investing and so deep into it. But that's what's happened now with these crypto coins, right? We have lots and lots of people deciding that they want to put their money into these things.
Well, now that you brought up Pokemon cards on this wildly successful podcast and millions of people are listening to this, it's only a matter of, minutes before the Department of Justice cracks down on those Pokemon card trading schemes. But,
I've disappointed some young children. I'm sorry.
I think, maybe take a step back, and we've kind of just mentioned it on the periphery of, crypto can be used for legitimate purposes, but more often than not, at least in what my reading is that it's used for illegitimate purposes. You mentioned ransomware, and that touches my world in terms of cyber risk and cyber insurance, but there's certainly tax avoidance or no tax activities going on with regard to crypto transactions in many cases. Illegal arms deals that are going on, human trafficking. Maybe you can kind of elaborate a bit on that.
Well, let me first, I'm going to take issue with the premise you threw out there, which is that there's more bad going on with crypto than good.
Okay.
I don't think that's the case. There are lots and lots of people legitimately investing in crypto through all sorts of crypto exchanges and buying wallets. And none of those people are doing anything wrong. I think it is a tiny minority of people who are out there wreaking havoc using crypto as a tool to do that. Just like is a tiny minority of people who are wreaking havoc with our ATMs by stealing ATM numbers. That doesn't mean everyone who uses an ATM is involved with fraud or anything or credit cards, right? There are in all sorts of successful industries, a small number of people who decide they want to try to take advantage. So I don't. There are lots and lots and lots of legitimate uses, and mostly we're seeing it used right now in investing. And people are acquiring these things because there's a market to do that, and others want them. But there are many different cryptocurrencies out there right now, and many which have different purposes. Many which have they talk about utility tokens that have utility to the token in and of itself. So you might be able to use it with smart contracts so that you could write contracts. And this is where the blockchain technology comes in, where you have a contract about, farmers hedging whether there's going to be enough rain for their farm to grow their crops. And you look at the rain, over a period of a time, the computer just does the math. How much rain was there? Therefore, the contract did or didn't get fulfilled, and you do or don't pay. And you can do all of that electronically and have true electronic contracts and not have to have people involved and those would all be very useful things to do with blockchain technology and with coins or crypto that are aligned with that kind of technology. So there's and even things like the NFTs, the non-fungible tokens, where people are collecting electronic images or electronic files that they become owners of limited numbers of these things and decide that they want to keep them. It may not be, my or your cup of tea that we're to collect one of these things, but that doesn't mean that it's not valuable to others. And those are good uses of the blockchain technology for people who want to own these things and make sure that they can prove ownership and can then transfer them on to others in a way in the future. So there's lots of good uses for these things, and we're seeing more and more uses come out all the time. And some are going to be more successful and some less as they play out in the world. And we're going to see which ones, in the future turn out to be great.
Well, thank you for clarifying it. Maybe I see the world through a more nefarious lens at times. Being in the insurance business, I think I'm maybe jaded to that degree. So maybe flipping over to the new cryptocurrency enforcement team at the Department of Justice. Can you tell us a little bit about what that team is doing, what they're looking for, what they're looking at, and what they're going to focus on?
So the team is new. We don't really know yet. We haven't seen announcements of new cases that they've brought. We haven't even seen, we know who they're reporting to. They're reporting to Ken Polite, the head of the criminal division at the Department of Justice. So we know who they're reporting to, but we don't know even who's heading the organization. So there's still, that group is in its infancy. But what it's been charged with doing, according to the press release that came out at the time that it was created, is to, among other things, look into particular types of wrongdoing related to cryptocurrency. So things like ransomware, things like money laundering, things like busting sanctions, things like purchasing illegal items on the dark web. All of those would be, easy uses of crypto that they'd want to target this group and that they've been charged with. And then, of course, there's many others, some of which you referenced before. Use of crypto for to avoiding taxes would be, I'm sure, something within their wheelhouse. Stealing crypto, just all out finding how to get into someone's wallet and stealing their coin would be something that this group would certainly go after. This group is going to have expertise in crypto and how it's traded and how it works, and they're going to be able to bring that expertise to the different U.S. attorneys' offices located in every district throughout the country, so that if you happen to have a crypto case in Maine, and maybe it's their first crypto prosecution in Maine, they get the benefit of the historical knowledge, the institutional knowledge of these DOJ attorneys in Washington who are part of this crypto team with their background and experience. So it allows the local prosecutors, the local U.S. attorneys, to continue to bring their cases, but have the benefit of institutional knowledge. Because otherwise, those groups will either shy away from doing a case. We've never done a crypto case before. How are we going to prosecute it? Where do we learn about it? Or they risk just getting it wrong because they don't understand the technology and they don't understand whether what they're seeing is criminal or not. So in that way, it's good for all of us to have this team that can help guide these local offices so that they don't prosecute people wrongly.
Mm-hmm. What's going on in the EU with regard to managing, regulating, and enforcing actions in the crypto world over there?
So I can't speak to the regulations going on in the EU. What we do see from the US side is that there's more and more efforts to coordinate internationally among the different regulators, because crypto is an international means of trading, a means of currency, so that you can't just try to attack it as a crime within your own borders. You're going to miss it that way. Mm-hmm. So this is one that is calling out for and requiring more and more international cooperation. And that's part of what I would expect this new team at DOJ to be doing, is building solid relationships with people in the EU, with the regulators there, so that they can all team together to bring these cases.
Yeah, that's kind of why I asked the question, because you can't kind of operate in a vacuum with this form of currency. It's so international in its scope.
That's right.
Yeah. So what do you think this new team is what's its impact going to have on the crypto industry today?
Well, I think it's going to have several impacts. One is for the bad guys. Hopefully, it's going to help root out some of the bad guys. What you see anytime you see an industry that's exciting, that's perhaps a little frothy, that's getting a lot of notoriety, you see the bad guys come in and try to take advantage. So back when I was a prosecutor, there were cases involving could people go after privately held shares, would make scams involving privately held shares of Uber or other companies like that before they had gone public, and offering, okay, you can buy into a fund that's going to get these privately held shares, and when these companies go public, you're going to make it big. Or similarly, there was a similar scam involving just straight internet holdings that people were going after. And so they would target people who knew less about those industries, but knew they were hot and they were in the press, and they would go after people and victimize them for investing in it. So we're going to see, of course, those kind of people are in the crypto world too. And if they can victimize people by pretending to sell coins or pretending to trade dollars for coins and then not delivering the coins, that's going to happen. So maybe those people will be pushed out more. Two, for the legitimate players, they're going to understand that they need to take regulation and compliance more seriously. So many of those people have been focused on making the greatest tech product they could make. They were focused on, how do we make the best coin? How do we build the best interface? How do we make the best trading platform? How do we make the best, most useful tech product? And they would write white papers, and that was the focus. They weren't focused on, how do we do the best anti-money laundering program or know your customer requirements. But what this DOJ team is making clear is that this industry is now matured, and these people need to take part in the same sorts of regulatory and compliance steps that mature financial institutions are involved in. And so it's no longer going to be enough to not know who your customers are in any way. It's no longer going to be enough to not worry where the money's coming from and where it's going, whether it's, violating sanctions or something like that, whether it's proceeds of a crime. And so I expect that the Department of Justice will likely make examples out of some industry players who have not abided by the rules or have ignored taking compliance seriously. And it's going to encourage everyone to ramp up their compliance steps.
Let me ask you a question. This may be obvious, but how do exchanges not comply with things like AML, anti-money laundering, Patriot Act, all the other compliance things you just mentioned? How have they been able to kind of skirt these laws?
So by exchanges, you mean crypto exchanges?
Correct.
So of course, some of them have not. Some of them are taking all of that seriously and have made compliance a top priority in their platform for a long time. But others, you can create a new coin and start distributing it, and if it catches fire, you don't necessarily have taken other steps in building that platform out about knowing who's getting it and who's buying it and what, where the money's, all those things. I mean, in part, it's almost the natural consequence of not, of focusing on your product and not focusing on the compliance. So I don't fault these people of having intended, there are some coins out there that are designed to be anonymous, and we might talk about that. And so are harder to take steps like that with. But apart from coins that are specifically designed to be anonymous, I don't think the people's goal was to flaunt these rules. They just didn't even think about how the rules might apply to their business.
Interesting. And you were kind of like leading along to how compliance is going to become a bigger factor. What are your recommendations for anybody in the crypto industries to be a better corporate citizen, to stay out of regulatory jail?
So, they need to start building compliance policies. They need to be building compliance programs. They need to understand what their risk profile is. Who are they? Who are their customers? How are people using their coins, or who's trading through them? How are people, getting fiat currency from after doing transactions with their coins? If people are doing that, and in some ways we're getting money out of the system. So they need to start doing the things, as you talked about, that a more traditional bank would do. They need to understand who their customers are, and they need to dig in to understand who the customer is. It's not enough that they just have a name of a corporate entity. They need to understand who the beneficial owners are. They need to understand, risk profiles. What country are these people in, or are they trading from? If it's from a country that has a higher risk profile, then they need to undertake more due diligence than they would from a lower risk profile. So just kind of the traditional steps that institutions take. And they need to, even understand are they dealing with sanctioned countries? They don't want to be doing business with Iran and North Korea. So that's important.
I was reading the other day about the potential for violations of OFAC when paying ransom demands or extortion demands from ransomware events to sanctioned countries. And I was like, oh my God, that just is a whole Pandora's box. That the typical business owner, they just want their data back. They want to go back into business. And many insurance companies who are paying those ransoms on behalf of their clients with cyber insurance are probably not doing a lot of research on where the perpetrator is located. But that could open a can of worms for a lot of folks, couldn't it?
Yeah, look, it's potentially a real problem. I don't think that the government is seeking to punish the people who are the victims. They're not trying to re-victimize them twice. But at the same time, they want people to know that that's a true issue. And it's not just business as usual to just pay for the ransomware and go on your way. If it turns out that you're dealing with North Korea and they're the ones who have infected your computer, you got to figure out how you deal with that. That can be a big problem.
Yeah, yeah. So along the lines of helping firms that are in the crypto industry, your firm has a special unit set up for crypto-related engagements. Is that correct?
So we built a crypto and fintech practice a few years ago now. Um, our firm is, as I've said, laser focused on banking and financial services. So about 16 of us are former Securities and Exchange Commission attorneys, in addition to the 5 who are former DOJ attorneys like me, plus people who spent time at FINRA and the Chicago Mercantile Exchange and the CFTC, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. And so we built up this blockchain, fintech, crypto practice several years ago. And we've been deeply involved helping companies in all sorts of areas, as you can imagine. If you're an exchange, how do you trade crypto, or can you trade crypto? If you're a broker dealer, what are the rules about buying and selling crypto for clients? There's been lots of news about ETF companies wanting to set up an ETF that tracks a basket of crypto. How do you do that? How do you use blockchain to do contracts and now we're seeing DeFi, distributed finance, which is the idea of being able to do transactions not just in one central location, but on multiple computers. And so how does that fit with the traditional regulations of the SEC and the CFTC? How does it fit with the idea that, and we've seen people come back and get in trouble for this with the traditional term definitions of what's a security versus what is not a security. So we've been helping clients in that area for a long time and continue to help them in that area.
And that's got to be a pretty unique practice group, not only within your firm, but within the industry as well. There's not a lot of firms that have that, correct?
A lot of people, firms, the biggest firms are all trying to at least have one person, it seems like, who does that.
Mm-hmm.
But having as deep a bench as we have, particularly among a firm of 55 attorneys, I think we're certainly an outlier in that way. We're really one of the leaders in this area in the country.
Interesting. Those organizations that are in the industry, how do they start to prepare for this sort of maybe scrutiny that's going to be coming down the pike?
Yeah, so I think that traditionally when you see DOJ stand up a new team or a new task force, as a next step, is DOJ needs to show success at that. They do that through stats of indictments, charges, those kinds of things. And along the way, they do things like send out subpoenas across the industry. This is how the Department of Justice gains information about what's going on in the industry. So they ask questions of lots and lots of companies. They can send out subpoenas to what we would call an industry sweep. They can work with someone like the SEC who can do the same thing. And so the subpoenas will ask lots of questions, and they can be onerous to answer, but they're not voluntary on these companies. Companies who get these kind of subpoenas need to take it seriously. They need to, do what we call holds, litigation holds, so that they stop destroying information that might be responsive to a subpoena. So they need to, for example, turn off backup destruction if they were to automatically destroy some old emails or things like that. And they need to collect their materials, and they need to respond promptly to the Department of Justice's subpoena or the SEC subpoena. Again, these kind of things are generally best handled with counsel, because you might get a subpoena and think, oh, there's a date on it. That's a lot of work to do to get this done in 3 days or 2 weeks. Well, in my experience, we can always get an extension, but I know that because I do these over and over and over again. And so I know I could always get an extension. And I know that even if they don't want to give me an extension, they're not going to take me to court without giving me a lot of opportunities to fulfill what they need fulfilled. So I can get a few extensions as long as I'm, as long as I'm being polite and I'm not just telling them to screw off. I'm working towards the goal. So these companies need to understand there's likely to be a sweep. They're likely to get subpoenas. likely also that FBI agents may come out and try to talk to people. That's another way you gain knowledge of what's going on in the industry. And that's something that didn't happen much over COVID because people were all staying home. But we would expect that, they knock on doors in the morning or at night after work, and they, try to buttonhole people and say, hey, can I ask you a few questions? And really they have not a few, they have 50. And then they will talk to someone for as long as that person will keep answering their questions and gain as much information as they can about the industry, and maybe even gain information about wrongdoing by that person or by others at their company or others they know. And that's how they build these cases, through that kind of footwork. And then eventually, once you've done subpoenas and you've done questioning, you might decide you need to execute a search warrant. And so they have the power to come into a company and seize computers and seize records and seize cell phones and things like that, and take all those away, which can make it very difficult to do business while that's happening. They also use that time when they come for a search warrant, when they're in your office, sometimes to question people some more. So these are all outgrowths of running a national industry sweep or an effort to go after an industry. That's how they build cases, and that's how they prosecute people, and how they get those stats to ultimately report back that they've been successful. So I think the industry needs to understand that all those things are likely to occur, and they need to prepare for it.
So that begs the question of, how do people within the industry maintain compliance and be a little bit more proactive rather than waiting for the knock on the door of somebody saying, hey, do you have a few minutes? I'd like to ask you a couple of questions. It starts off innocently, and then the next thing you know, you're down the rabbit hole, and it's too late to call Steve Feldman. What's the proactive step that these folks should be thinking about today?
Well, it's never too late to call Steve Feldman, by the way. So I can't tell you the number of times people call me after they've already answered questions for 2 hours with the FBI agents. But even then, it is so much better for the person to have a lawyer on their side at that point than not. So you always want to call a lawyer in those kinds of situations. But the proactive steps are the ones you and I were talking about before, which is start thinking about, what is your compliance or lack of compliance going to look like to outsiders if it's subjected to scrutiny, and you need to start building a program to deal with that. And you need to go through that process. What is your risk assessment, your risk tolerance, your risk profile? So you look at your risk profile and determine, who are you doing business with? Who are the kind of people who are doing business with you? And what's the risk of what we're doing? And how do we take reasonable steps to make sure that the bad guys aren't taking advantage of us, aren't using us to carry out their criminal activities? And it's the difference between taking those kind of things seriously or, looking the other way and pretending you didn't see it at all. It was going on. Oh, nobody was, the ostrich's head under the sand, or, I'm not a what gambling, what gambling, right? I mean, it's, so they need to take those kind of things seriously and deal with them. And those are the steps that they're going to avoid problems down the road.
Now, not as a shameless self-promotion here, but you've mentioned to me in the past that your firm has an application, an iPhone app, right? Tell us a little bit about that.
So we created a free iPhone app called M&M Defend for Murphy and McGonigle Defend, M&M, M Defend. And it's an app for both the iPhone and for Google Play. And the idea of the app is it puts 60 seconds or 3 minutes of legal guidance on someone's phone so that if they are in one of these emergency situations, they are ready to deal with that response instantaneously before they can get the lawyer on the phone and before they can get some advice. So the app tells you what to do to respond to that surprise knock at the door. So somebody shows up from the FBI and wants to question you, you can read 60 seconds or 3 minutes of advice on how to deal with the FBI. And mostly what it is say, can I take your card and I'll have my lawyer get back in touch with you. But it gives you suggestions on how to deal with it. Same thing with how to deal with a search warrant at your office or your warehouse or your home. What are your rights in that situation and how do you respond? How to deal with a surprise exam by the Securities and Exchange Commission or the CFTC if they show up in your business and start asking questions. Those are all how to deal with a document subpoena, right? This industry sweep where a document has been sent out, a subpoena requesting that you produce documents and electronic materials back to the government. How do you deal with that? So all of that is put forth in the app, and it provides guidance. It also provides access to recorders so people can record the interviews with one button. They can take videotapes of the search warrants going on with one button. And of course, it also includes contact information for lawyers so they can get me and my colleagues on the phone instantaneously through our cell phones, whatever, so that we can help answer their questions.
Great idea.
Thank you.
Have you had much success with it, or is it still in its infancy?
So the app has a number of users who have downloaded it. And it also has a mailing list. So we've gotten a lot of people to sign up for the mailing list. And so we provide some information to them periodically without spamming them. And we are, we can update the app by adding new guides. So we're talking about adding a guide for how to deal with the cyber breach situation. And other kinds of emergency occurrences so that people can have some instantaneous legal advice on their phones. So it's been very well received and has gotten a lot of interest. What we say in all these presentations is that the government style is to take advantage of people being nice, right? The FBI agent says, I just want to ask you a few questions when he or she has 50 questions. And you say, oh, sure. And the agent says, well, you want me to do it on your front doorstep, or would you like me to come into your living room? And you say, of course, come in. Don't stand on the front door. Well, it's a lot harder to get that person to leave your house when they're in your living room, seated in a chair, asking 50 questions. Oh, I just got a couple more. Please, just give me another minute. Than it is to say, no, you're not coming into my house and I'm calling my lawyer and I'm not talking to you. That's not what we do. So even with the app, you people can read it. They still think maybe it's better for me in this situation to talk my way out of it. And it almost never is.
And it's kind of this weird human, personality trait that, like you said earlier, we want to be nice. You don't want to, especially somebody in authority, you don't want to piss them off. You want to be kind to them. And, if you show kindness, they'll be kind and reciprocate, but that's not the case.
No, and you think it's business. Oh, I provide good customer service. I return my calls promptly. I'm not going to be rude to people. Can I ask you a question? Of course you can. That's what I'm here for.
Yeah, exactly. Good luck with that.
Yeah.
Well, Steve, it's been a great conversation. Do you have anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up?
No, this is fantastic, Gordon. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you.
Well, it was interesting, and I think if anybody sees this on YouTube or listens to it, it's certainly going to have a lot of crypto hashtags, so it might attract some attention. I'd encourage you to get in touch with Steve. I'll put his contact info in the show notes. And I'll also put in the M&M Defend application if there's a link or whatever information I can find out. I'll put that in the show notes as well. I think for anybody in the industry, it's not a bad idea to just have that on your phone and have a level of awareness that maybe this is something that could be helpful down the road if a regulator or an enforcement authority is knocking on your door.
Right. So yeah, so thank you for that. Yeah. So it is available in the iPhone store, the Apple store. So you can find the link there to it. And it's also in Google Play. So there's a link there. The other thing I'd recommend is my firm has a website called blockchainlawcenter.com where we track what's going on in the crypto blockchain world on what are the latest legal pronouncements, what are the biggest cases, what are the new regulatory announcements. So people interested in following the industry should follow blockchainlawcenter.com and they can stay up to date on a lot that's going on in the industry.
And I'm sure on that website, you've got an email sign up kind of a thing for a newsletter.
I don't know if we do or not, but
Okay.
but people are welcome to, if they want to get on our client newsletter, they are welcome to contact me. We can certainly add them to the firm marketing list on those issues.
Great. Well, Steve, thanks again for joining the show. If anybody who's listening has an interesting story that they'd like to tell on the New York Business Leaders Podcast, give me a call, drop me an email. My contact will also be in the show notes, and we'll get you on the show. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Gordon.
Take care, Steve.
That's it for this week's episode of the New York Business Leaders Podcast. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss next week's episode. In the meantime, find more interviews and resources at nybusinessleaders.com.